Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to host our California Fire Science webinar series today. And we're really happy to host three excellent scholars from UC Davis who are going to be talking to us about cultural burning. Before we get started, I just wanted to give some background. Again, this is set up as a webinar format as our previous talks have been. So unfortunately, the audio and video from participants isn't on, but we do have a question and answer box, and we encourage you to ask questions, and we'll be answering them at the end of the series. Also, we'll hold an informal discussion for an hour afterwards, and we'll send out the link in the chat towards the end. It also was in the email that was sent out to participants. We'd also like to thank the groups that sponsored this seminar series. So myself, Michael Goldner from UC Berkeley, the Fire Research Group at UC Berkeley and the Department of Engineering and the Engineering College originally sponsored this group. And we're glad to have Jeanette Kovian and Crystal Colden from UC Merced, who have been co-organizers of this seminar series. And we're now also coordinating with the California Fire Science Consortium, which is part of the Joint Fire Science Program. So we're really pleased to introduce our speakers today. The first speaker is Professor Beth Rose Middleton Manning, and she's a professor and chair of Native American Studies at UC Davis. We also have Deniss Martinez, who is a PhD candidate in the graduate group in ecology at UC Davis and a health policy research scholar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And finally, we have Melinda M, belongs to the ND San Carlos Apache tribe of Arizona, and is a second-year PhD student in the Department of Native American Studies at UC Davis. So we're really pleased to welcome them here today, and we hope we have some great questions and discussions following. Thank you. Want to go ahead and share? We'll get started.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I'll go ahead and share screen and we'll get started. Okay, well, thank you again. My name is Beth Rose Middleton Manning, and I am speaking to you from Putwin Homelands in Davis, and grateful to be here with you all and to be with my co-presenters, Deniss and Melinda, to talk about this project that we've been working on for the last few years. And throughout, I really want to emphasize and recognize our collaborators and partners in this work, without whom this project would not be possible. So this project, which involves several components, is called Keepers of the Flame. And I want to also recognize Dr. Christopher Adlam, an alum of UC Davis, who helped develop that title and helped develop this project as well. And he's now at Oregon State University. And this image, just quickly, is at the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve. We are working with redbud there on the hillside, and just want to express my gratitude to the Weavers, the Tending and Gathering Garden Steering Committee, and especially Diana Almendariz and Pam Gonzalez and Zach Emerson for their partnership there. So the goal of this project is learning and teaching about good fire from multiple perspectives. And we will give a little background and context, and then talk about the course and the workshops, which are supported by a variety of partners, and then some preliminary research and outcomes, looking at how people have responded to the opportunities to be involved in listening and learning and implementing cultural burning in two different areas for this presentation. So this is working on burning deer grass, again at the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve, and our wonderful partner, collaborator, teacher Diana Almendariz is there in the center. So a little context to start off about the importance of cultural burning. In a context of climatic change, increasing heat, dryness, and the increasing vulnerability of the landscape to catastrophic fire, it's more important than ever to look to these mechanisms of land care and stewardship that have long been developed and practiced and implemented by Indigenous peoples all over the world. And we're focused particularly in California, and we Deniss will speak more about this later, but we recognize that we live within a context, a colonial context, where there's a heavy legacy of fire suppression, of exclusion of Indigenous peoples from land stewardship, and really removal and violence toward Indigenous peoples in the history of California. And that suppression of both people and the practice of stewardship has resulted in significant and widespread negative outcomes, both in communities and on the land in terms of ecology. And we recognize that traditional knowledge of landscape stewardship, as applied in native-led restoration, including cultural burning, has multiple co-benefits for multiple facets of ecosystem health, as well as local work opportunities, community empowerment, and responding to, for example, Governor Newsom's executive order and the development of the Truth and Healing Council, which is looking at addressing the history of oppression and exclusion in California. So we're looking at that specifically in terms of land stewardship and fire. And we hope through this project that we are helping to support the training and development of current and future resource managers on the importance of cultural burning, on respectful collaboration, on recognizing and supporting Indigenous-led burning projects, finding funding and support for collaborative land restoration, and facilitating land access, land jurisdiction by Indigenous coalitions implementing these methods. There has been a lot of science, different publications that have come out recognizing the multifaceted effectiveness of cultural burning in terms of increasing habitat, raising the water table, improving the overall health of the ecosystem for all species, and reducing the risk of catastrophic fire by removing downed brush and woody materials and opening up the forest. So I have a partial list of some resources here, which is not complete, but just want to point out the excellent scholarship by Don Hankins, Frank Lake, Jonathan Long, Jared Aldern, Ron Goode, and many others who have been documenting the impacts of cultural burning on different aspects of the ecosystem for many years. And this image here on the right is Ron Goode, who's North Fork Mono, Chairman Goode, who's a wonderful partner and collaborator in much of this work, is doing meadow restoration work. And he offered this next picture as well. So thank you if you're on, Chairman Goode, showing the meadow some years later. So I would suggest perhaps inviting him to speak about this in a future seminar, because I think this work is really powerful and important, and he's been doing it on both private and public lands. So I think, Deniss, do I pass it to you here?
Yeah, so my camera off to save my internet, but I'll go on. So in California, fire in particular is an important part of maintaining Indigenous livelihoods and the ecosystem and the ecosystems that support that livelihood. Many California Native people view their cultures as fire dependent, and fire has been used to maintain key food and basketry staples, as well as wildlife habitat for elk and salmon. And so fire, therefore, uplifts Indigenous food and cultural sovereignty and also ensures the well-being of California Native communities. So just a quick note, whenever I provide a list such as this that you see on this slide, I like to throw in the caveat that this list is not exhaustive. And in fact, each practice and use is informed by cultural values, institutions, and knowledge. And so traditional ecological knowledge is not just a list of practices, but rather the cultural institutions that put these practices forward. But I think that seeing this, helps us visualize the material manifestations of Indigenous knowledge. Next slide, please, Beth Rose. So settler colonialism really disrupted Indigenous livelihoods in California by making fire illegal and actively suppressing it using a command and control approach to natural resource management that really began in the early 19th century. Native people continued to practice cultural burning to the frustration of settlers that used this to instigate violence against California Native communities. Fire suppression has taken the form of violence, like shooting people on site for being seen burning, harassment of weavers, and arrest of so-called arsonists. And it also has taken the form of slow violence, like the loss of native plants and cultural species, as well as the loss of safe forest conditions that has led to the cultural suppression and large wildfires of today. Next slide, please. So this is why people like Frank Lake, who is Kaduk and Yurok, cultural practitioner, have framed cultural burning as a spiritual obligation and also an act of political defiance in the context of government oppression and regulation. Next slide, please. So the Keepers of the Flame project was really formed, like Beth Rose said, by the projects and efforts of multiple grad students in our research group, and of course, Beth Rose. So the first component of this project is the educational piece, which is a quarter-long course focused on cultural burning practices in California. The second major aspect is our workshops. So these are community-led cultural fire workshops hosted by people like Ron Goode, Diana Almendariz, and Don Hankins. Community members create a guest list that has included folks from various places in the fire world. Guests have been, Native youth, university researchers, students, policymakers, and managers. And the third aspect of our project is research, which is a growing part of the project. In the past, we've done surveys of our students and, hope to do more surveys of workshop participants to see the impact of those as well. Go ahead, Beth Rose.
Oh, thank you so much, Deniss. I just wanted to add that we have some wonderful supporters. I want to recognize the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center for supporting the workshops and practitioner participation, as well as the Yocha Dehe Endowed Chair in Native American Studies for supporting aspects of the class and the workshops as well. And then Department of Plant Sciences has also been supportive at UC Davis. And I also wanted to open it up to see, Melinda, if you wanted to add anything on this slide.
No, it looks great. Unpacking a lot, and it's going great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So here's a snapshot of the class and a workshop flyer from pre-COVID times. So on the left is, the cover of the report we give to our collaborators. Like Beth Rose said, this doesn't happen, just with our research group. It happens with a lot of partners, and we're really grateful for that support. Next slide, please.
I'll just add one thing about the workshops. This was a particularly exciting one last January. We had a lot of participation from local community members, as well as multiple tribal fire departments. So that was exciting.
So to dive into the class a bit more, the class is composed of undergraduate and graduate students and sometimes community auditors. Students hear from cultural fire practitioners throughout the quarter and are invited to workshops, which you'll hear more about in a bit. The students engage community members and produce a digital storytelling final project in which they pick a topic and present their perspective on what they learned. Students are taught to engage in, community in a reciprocal framework, and several have gone on to work with our community partners. So Zach Emerson from the TGG, the Tending and Gathering Garden pictured here, is actually the restoration manager there now, and he was one of the students in this class. So it's always really great when our students become our partners. Next slide, please.
Oh, Deniss, I just wanted to jump in. This is Melinda. I just wanted to add the reasoning for the digital storytelling project was so that we would have something to gift back and present to our community collaborators as a way to showcase their work and their approach to cultural fire, as they're all distinct, as Beth Rose and Deniss had shared. And so in thinking about a final project, what our students could share amongst themselves and how they learn differently from each of the burn demonstrations and guest talks, but also to have that be given to our community members for them to use.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. So this class really comes as a result of a lot of amazing relationships that we have built over the years. Beth Rose has built over the years. So we really consider our partners, our students partners in caring for those relationships, as well as, building their own relationships. So this class ethic that you see on this slide guides our students and our class. The first piece is, openness and humility. Some of our students may already have expertise in some aspect of fire or environmental policy. We have really great, PhD students and undergrads that have done a lot of work in this area. And this is awesome, but we want them to approach this class with cultural and professional humility. Western science sometimes limits what we consider knowledge or who we consider knowledgeable. And in this class, we aim to be aware of that bias and actively counteract it by engaging Indigenous knowledge with respect. Reciprocity is another value. Like Melinda was saying, we try to build opportunities to reciprocate the generosity of our partners into the structure of the class. And, but however, we're still aware that given the history of research and researchers in Indigenous communities, we are incredibly blessed and also incredibly responsible to ensure that our work is ethical, reciprocal, and relational. The last value that guides us is responsibility. So in class, we learn a lot about the challenges that our cultural practitioners are facing. And as we learn about this injustice, we are placed in a position of responsibility. So learning about these issues places us in a position where we have to, that asks of us that we do our part to help address these issues, even if it is in modest ways. Next slide, please. So, and we're really excited that this class has also been impactful for our students. These are some reflections from our students. And I think one that really stood out to me was the idea that this one particular student felt more comfortable having, addressing topics that are uncomfortable and felt more empowered to do more to kind of support native-led initiatives. Others have, said that this has changed their entire notion of environmental health or ecology. And so we're really happy that this has been impactful for them and that we are able to have these conversations in class to unpack some of these preconceived notions of the environment. Beth, Rose, Melinda, anything to add here? Okay, well then I'll just go on to the next slide.
I might just say quickly that we have students come back and participate in classes in future years after they've taken the class. They come and participate in workshops even in the future. So people are developing relations and returning, and I think it's very positive.
Yeah, and I will just add that many of our students are in Native American studies, but we also have a fair number that are outside of Native American studies. In fact, they're heavily in the science and ecology types of disciplines. And so one of the goals with the class is to arm those students with the type of policy tools and responsibility to move as allies through this scholarship with Indigenous cultural practitioners. And so having them be aware of the policy constrictions, but also the leverages that our practitioners have worked towards and have gained, and then setting them off where they might be in those positions to make that policy change or be in those environmental fields to uplift the work of our cultural practitioners.
So I think I'll start off on the fire workshops. So these involve many more participants than our students, often diverse community members, tribal members, tribal fire crew members. Many different people have come out to the workshops, agency folks, etc. So one of the positive things about the workshops has been building relationships throughout the state between agencies and practitioners, and opportunities have developed for intertribal collaboration between different tribal crews, between agencies and tribes, and there's also been opportunities for student growth participating in these workshops, which are much bigger and more diverse than the class. We also hope we've been contributing to landscape stewardship in different areas, and I have acknowledged the funders already. Deniss, Melinda, anything to add here? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so these are some pictures from Actually, I think this was our first year out with Chairman Goode in 2018, and this was before we developed a class. This is one of our early opportunities to be able to work with him on the land under his instruction. So here you can see students, and I think Deniss is included in this picture, cutting back sourberry, and we were also working with redbud and learning how to participate in cultural burning in a respectful way. And so this is the burning after piling on the bush, and then raking to mix the soils. And our fire workshops last year, we had two, one in Mariposa with Chairman Goode and one at the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Nature Preserve. And you can see the flyer there. The one in Mariposa, we had over 100 attendees from a wide spectrum of entities and communities. And we worked in a few areas. We burned a large field that had been impacted by invasive plants, and we supported weavers who were gathering and processing basketry materials from a previous burn. And it was really just an honor to be there and 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 be there a year after participating in initial burning, to be there with the weavers who were then talking about how they harvest the plants and why it's important that they were burned, and seeing that the health of the plants had increased after the burn. At the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve, multiple tribal fire personnel attended, diverse communities of weavers. We had representatives from different aspects of the university and many community members, as well as agency folks. So both good workshops, and the TGG in particular, that work was special because this year and last year we're able to be out there for Saturdays or Sundays ahead of the workshop to prepare the land for the burn, and to be able to spend time with members of the Tending and Gathering Garden steering committee there and hear about the importance of that site and the importance of caring for the plants. So for our students, it wasn't only about coming out for the burn, but also the work leading up to the burn and the work after the burn to take care of the land after the burning. So really a positive kind of full circle participation. Also did a little burning with the Maidu Summit Consortium with the other students, and that is on their land at Tasman up in the Northern Sierra. And here are some images from the burns in Mariposa and also at the Tending and Gathering Garden. So some of the outcomes on the land, we saw strong growth, healthy growth of culturally important plants. As I mentioned, being able to be there with weavers, Gladys McKinney, Julie Tex, Florence Dick, pictured in this photo here, was wonderful, was very inspiring and fulfilling to be there after having participated in burning. I also saw a reduction in brush and woody debris, materials that needed to be cleaned up and that could pose fire hazard. There were more materials available for weavers and elders who came both when we were there and also at other times. There are plans for soil surveys. One of our collaborators, Melinda, has expertise in soil science. So she's planning some soil surveys at the Tending and Gathering Garden. And we've heard from our partners, and this is something we hope to expand in the future as people are interested in terms of monitoring after the burning, but we've heard reported increases in biodiversity. And I would like to emphasize that these are ongoing relationships, both with practitioners, but also with the land, that cultural burning is not a one-off in any way. It involves maintenance, returning to the site and taking care of it over time, and burning again. Anything to add there on outcomes? Okay, so this last year we had to deal with COVID, of course, but because we were outside, socially distant, wearing masks, we were still able to do a couple of workshops, although they were much smaller. Again, with the Tending and Gathering Garden, with our collaborators on the steering committee, we were able to participate in preparing the site and doing some small burns leading up to the larger burn, as well as coming out after for raking and planting after the burn. And we had one workshop with Chairman Goode, and we're looking forward to another one. And there we burned basketry plants and took care of the sourberry that had been burned previously, and contributed to, as you can kind of see in this picture on the right, restoring a historic trail along the creek that had been overgrown with a lot of brush. And in general, we cleared brush, removed some dead trees in preparation for a larger burn. And these are some images from the work with Chairman Goode in Mariposa earlier this month. And we're working with the sourberry, removing some drowned brush and dead trees. And you can see it's multi-generational and very collaborative, working together on the land there and learning about cultural burning practitioner. And in this picture, we have Melinda in the foreground, starting to light the sourberry, and some of our students and collaborators in the background. So a few characteristics of cultural burning. I want to recognize Jessie here, who's one of our teachers working with Chairman Goode. Some of the characteristics of this practice is that it's site specific, it's intensive, it involves repetitive burning over time at appropriate intervals. Oops. It begins with ceremony and intention. It emphasizes ethics, as we alluded to a little earlier, of relationality, relationship to the place over time, responsibility to care for the land, respect between people and non-humans, and between the community members, and reciprocity, giving back and receiving. It's also very practical and necessary work. I really appreciate what I've learned from Bill Tripp, Director of Natural Resources of the Karuk tribe, in terms of thinking about burning as human services for ecosystems. So often we think about ecosystem services, what the ecosystem provides humans, but I love the concept of human services for ecosystems, how we care for and contribute to ecosystems. I've also heard that concept discussed by Dr. Frank Lake. And we also want to emphasize, of course, that we've talked about a couple different examples in partnership with Chairman Goode, with Diana Almendariz and others, but cultural burning is highly diverse and varied depending on where you are, on collaborators, on the conditions of the land, on needs of both the land and the community. And it can vary very much in scale. So it is not necessarily always small scale. It can be quite widespread depending on the opportunities available. Oftentimes now with a larger scale area of culture burning, you need to have collaborations that can cross jurisdictions. And it also, of course, depends on the landscape conditions, and sometimes preparing the land for cultural burning might involve some thinning and pile burning and other work before a cultural burn can take place. One thing that has also been very inspiring to all of us, I think, is thinking about the community health aspects. So people of multiple generations working together, strengthening, invigorating, reinvigorating, supporting traditions and the passing on of those traditions. The way that language and cultural practice are intertwined with restoring land, taking care of land, stewarding land, harvesting. And then the health benefits of just working together outside, the empowerment, the recognition of both the history of suppression, but also the opportunities to support Indigenous-led cultural burning today.
Yeah, so this is my slide. So, given all these benefits, it was important for us to think about the challenges that kind of get in the way of cultural burning. So first and foremost, land tenure can be a huge challenge. California is unique in that treaties that were signed here were not ratified by Congress. So most reservations in California were created in different ways, like maybe like an executive order, an act of Congress. This means that a lot of tribes in California do not have access to quote unquote jurisdiction in their traditional territories. And this means that tribes have to find a way to share decision making. Tribes that are federally recognized have some policies that they can lean in on to do this, but federally unrecognized tribes are more often left out. So this leads us to decision making, which is another challenge. When tribes are able to get to the decision making table, they are met with more challenges. So the first is that they share the table with people who may not respect their sovereignty or view them as equal partners. The second is that many times agencies make decisions on a large scale. So even if they have great relationships with local agency folks, there can be conflict with decision makers that sit in Sacramento or DC who are ultimately in charge of making decisions. Policy is another challenge. All of these different rules can serve as, as a form of gatekeeping. And additional issues that many times our policies and requirements are incompatible with adaptive management or Indigenous stewardship, either because the paperwork is clunky and takes too long, so that people miss burn windows, or the fact that wildfires in different parts of the state shut down prescribed and cultural fire in other parts that are unaffected. Sometimes the state's decisions directly conflicts with something the tribe believes is important. The main point is that, this big clunky machinery that is our political system is often too slow or too general to truly adapt like Indigenous stewardship demands. Public perception is the last challenge. I think and hope that this has improved, at least from my perception in the last year. But sometimes, smoke or preservation concerns make people object to prescribing cultural fire. And, that's another challenge. So this is a flash overview of some of the challenges that we've heard to cultural burning. And there's, more that we can learn from California Native practitioners and leaders throughout the state.
Thank you, Deniss. That was a great overview. So a few grounds for hope. Given that we've been thinking about challenges, we also want to make sure we talk about opportunities. So emerging state policies, although the state is a big, clunky policy machine, I guess. I'm excited to see the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan, which just came out in January, specifically recognizes tribes as partners in developing prescribed fire plans, recommends funding specifically to support cultural burning. That's very exciting. Also recognize the California Climate Assessment for the first time there was a tribal and indigenous chapter, and includes a lot of good information about cultural burning, some written by Don Hankins and Chairman Goode, as well as others. Executive Order N8220 on biodiversity, again from Governor Newsom, recognizes the importance of cultural burning in California. So I see kind of unprecedented recognition by the state and opportunities to see funding roll out to support cultural burning. So that's exciting. Also many on-the-ground collaborations, the TREX, training exchange, workshops, cross-jurisdictional partnerships to enable cultural burning across landscapes, across different jurisdictions. Similar to that, increasing learning opportunities. We're very excited to have a Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center postdoc arriving soon, and this person will be one of a cohort of postdocs, one at each of the Climate Adaptation Science Centers around the United States. And all of these postdocs will be working on fire and developing a synthesis report on fire. And the postdoc housed with us will focus on cultural fire. And there's at least one other postdoc looking at prescribed fire. So it's an exciting moment, I think, for investment in more collaborative research and policymaking around fire. Intertribal collaborations are very inspiring. And of course, we're excited about our Keepers of the Flame workshop and course, and hopefully future partnerships between the university, tribes, tribal organizations, tribal nonprofits to increase cultural burning even on lands within the jurisdiction of the university. Also, we see as very hopeful the recognition of tribal and indigenous leadership in fire, Cultural Fire Management Council, Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, and both national and international initiatives thinking about work happening in Australia, in Canada, etc. It's again, exciting time, and there's a lot of recognition of cultural burning. So a few next steps here. We are going to be implementing evaluations at the workshops to try to get a sense of what has been most important for people, what they have learned the most about, what they would like to learn more about, maybe ideas for collaborations, opportunities to help network and support partnerships to expand the application of good fire. Excited, there's definitely some excitement around the soil surveys and monitoring that Melinda will be developing, working with the tending and gathering garden. We hope to conduct more research on strategies to expand support for cultural burning at multiple levels. There's also some interest in the potential for cultural burning as a carbon sequestration strategy, as it has been recognized in Australia with Aboriginal-led burning there. And again, just contributing to research and engagement, both on the ground, but also policy and even more quantitative research to support cultural burning across jurisdictions, and broadly supporting opportunities for education, enhancement of landscape health, all while addressing some of the big issues of liability, permitting, and certification issues. And of course, we're always working on fundraising for more collaborative cross-jurisdictional Indigenous-led burning efforts and finding ways to support those that are already happening. So thank you so much. We really appreciated getting the chance to share this with you today, and we look forward to future discussion.
Thank you so much for your talk. That was some really great and amazing collaborative outreach to present. So we have time for questions, and I'll just remind everyone that it's great. We have about 25 minutes for questions, and then afterwards we'll switch to a more interactive format, and I'll send out the link then. So the first question is from Vanessa Kavanagh, and she's coming from Wollongong in Australia. And she was wondering if you know of cultural burning that may have been undertaken in other countries, Africa, Asia, etc., as she's only heard of it in Australia, the US, and Canada.
That's a terrific question. I know there is cultural burning happening in other nations. I was connected by a colleague at the Nature Conservancy with some folks in Africa, I believe, who were engaged in savanna burning there, but I haven't followed up on those contexts or investigated that further. So I know there is information. If you email me, I can share what I do have if that's appropriate. And I don't know, Deniss or Melinda, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add.
Looks like Chris Adlam is on, and he says there's lots of savanna burning in South America. But like Beth Rose said, I'm not as familiar with those contexts. That's a great question.
Yeah, I also just wanted to point out, hi, Chris. It's wonderful that you're on. Thank you for all the work that you've done and continue to do. And just refamiliarizing everyone with the IPAs, the Indigenous people's areas that are protected and encouraged and paid to be able to burn. That's definitely something, a model we would like to have in California and in the States, period. And so I really admire the work that you've entered the conversation with in having that question, but that's my most proximate familiarity with work that's done worldwide.
Thanks, and please continue to use the Q&A. It helps me route questions, though after I go through the Q&A, I'll do some of the questions in the chat too. So we have another question from Brian Mayorella. Has there been any example of continuous and large-scale application of these historical techniques? Or is there any significant uncertainty about the details of historic cultural fire techniques due to discontinuity in their application?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say that, at least from what I have learned, that there's always been some level even of small scale cultural burning among many nations that historically practiced it, that there is at least some continuity in the present day, but I don't have much knowledge about large scale cultural burning. I might point up to the Klamath, but I would defer to folks up there to answer that question. Deniss, do you have knowledge of that from your collaborations up north?
I think that they do larger scale. I think it depends on what you mean by large. But I think that there's definitely been continuity, and there's a lot of continued evolving of knowledge. So knowledge is being created always. So that aspect of the question is just, it's important to note that it's always been continuous, evolving, and creating that knowledge.
And I'll just add, and I think Beth Rose alluded to this earlier, the difference between prescribed burns and cultural burns. Our favorite quote is that with prescribed burns, it's kind of a one-time deal. We come out, we're very militant, we're very organized about how they set fire to smaller scale, large scale areas. And then with cultural burning, we have that beforehand prep, those conversations that we hold and going into the burn itself, then the actual burn and the cleanup of it. And so just those differentiations. And the distinguishment of cultural burns is the fact that they're small scale and done in smaller areas to control the slowness and the severity of it. So that's definitely the context of the cultural burn demonstrations themselves. And then in speaking with our practitioners, and I'm not quite sure if this is answering the question or a question, but some of the barriers that are an extension of and included in what the information Deniss shared is that the three main things that we run into are personnel, so lack of just bodies being able to conduct the burns, labor, maybe the funding that goes into that as well, and then regulatory frameworks that we spoke at length about. So I do know that those are the things that maybe keep them small scale from evolving into those larger scale burns.
Also, I might just add, I've been having conversations with people lately too about, the potential for reinvigorating larger scale cultural burning, but it will involve not only cross-jurisdictional collaborations, but also the preparation of the land, which may be in very different conditions across those jurisdictions, depending on how engaged, for example, an agency landowner or a private landowner has been in taking care of the land. It might require a lot of prep just crossing property lines. But I have heard from community members, stories of traditionally lighting fires that cross quite a broad area. So there is that potential, I think, to bring back cultural burning on a larger landscape.
Thank you. And before I get to the next question, there's been a lot of questions in the chat and some that I think I just want to address here. One is if someone from the group can share the emails, because I think a lot of people would like to follow up and get in touch with the speakers. And the other is that people were asking, are there any programs or ways for people in the general public or those not affiliated with your university to get involved with the courses or the programs that you have?
Yes, so the workshops are on the one hand open to the public, but on the other, we really defer to our collaborators because oftentimes they are in areas that they have been taking care of for many, many years, perhaps multi-generationally. So I defer to them in terms of how many people they would like, who they would like to invite, and then we work together on developing that invitation list. But I think reach out and we can have that conversation. I think there is some interest in expanding workshops too in other areas. So we hope that's something we can grow. It definitely takes time building these partnerships. I'm also hearing about exciting work that is happening in local areas, outside of our project, but between, say, fire safe councils and community members and tribes and Native nonprofits working together to develop opportunities to implement good fire. So you might look, not only reach out to us, but also look in your local area and start building that communication.
Yeah, and
Great.
then, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
In terms of the class, I think it is listed on Open Campus, is that right?
Yes, yeah, any class can be taken through Open Campus through UC Extension.
Yeah, so that's always a possibility, and yeah, we're always happy to have some folks from outside UC Davis.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. So there's another question from Brian. Is there adequate knowledge of details of historic cultural fire techniques to make a comparative study, understanding differences in techniques applied by different local populations acting in distinct environmental regions?
I mean, that's a good question. I know there's research happening about that. For example, Chairman Valentin Lopez with Amamutsun Tribal Band, I know he is engaged in collaboration with several faculty members at UC Berkeley, looking at both historic and contemporary cultural burning within their homeland. So I think the answer to that might be specific regional studies and collaborations that are happening.
Great, thank you. So I have another question. I'll adapt it to make it shorter from Antoine Wunsch. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And they were asking, generally, is cultural burning applicable across California ecosystems? And I think they highlighted the one that's often a question in chaparral ecosystems.
So I'm not the person who's knowledgeable about chaparral. I don't know if Deniss or Melinda or even Chris would like to weigh in on this. I know that there's a hearty debate around chaparral, and there are publications around that. You know, I would defer to the indigenous peoples from areas with chaparral to talk about their history of stewardship and their contemporary stewardship of plant communities that include chaparral.
Yeah, I would agree. Most of my work has been in forests, and you know that's definitely a big question right now is chaparral. So that's a great question, but maybe I'm not the best person to answer.
Yeah, and I'd add, because we have everyone here, if anyone has a reference or anything to contribute, feel free to post it on the chat, and I'll reshare it with the rest of the group.
And this might be something, sorry, this might be something fun to talk about in the discussion too, a little.
Absolutely, I'll bring it up again there. So Lindsay Lashik had a question. Who owned the land that you were burning on in your example?
So different partners. For example, with the tending and gathering garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve, I believe that is a public preserve, and it's in some sort of conservation status. It is restoration land or mitigation land from gravel mining, but it's, as I understand, it's owned by, or it's part of this nonprofit Cache Creek Nature Preserve. And then the tending and gathering garden is a specific area that is managed specifically for the development of basketry plants, culturally important plants. And that project was developed, gosh, probably about 20 years ago between a UC Davis graduate student, Shannon Brawley, members of the Tending and Gathering Garden Steering Committee, who are weavers from throughout California, Indigenous weavers, as well as, I think there was partnership from Yocha Dehe, as well as the Nature Preserve to develop that project. So that's kind of private conserved mitigation land. And then the land that we burn on with Chairman Goode, that's within his family. But also he provided a couple of the photos there that were from his work on public land.
Thank you. So I'll keep going through to keep mixing some of the questions here. What about safety on the burns? What risk management process are you using?
So this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and there are a couple of different aspects to that. I've been slowly drawing on our different supporters to purchase Nomex and some safety gear for our student collaborators. We're trying to make sure to get the word out to people ahead of time about appropriate clothing and shoes for the burns, eye covering, etc. And we also you know, really begin with conversation with the practitioners, with the leaders of the burn about protocols and keeping everyone safe. And, you know, the ceremonial aspect too is also, I'm just going to speak from my own perception. It's like really centering people in where we are and what we're about to do together, and being very intentional in our work on the land. So it's not like people are running around with you know, lighting fires. It's really following the instruction of the practitioners, and it's wonderful to watch. And I've personally learned so much from Chairman Goode, as well as Diana Almendariz and others, in how they talk about how you relate to fire and how you think about fire and recognize that it can be destructive, and how do you develop a relationship with it that is not destructive but productive. And you know, that might sound very theoretical, but being on the ground with people who've been doing this for a long time, who are very familiar with the plants and that environment and their behavior in relationship to fire, it's really an incredible learning opportunity. So I would just answer that in two ways. One is that we're getting safety gear and informing people about, you know, safety practices and protocols, but we're also listening really closely to our practitioners and our collaborators who have a lot of detailed knowledge about those places and how to apply fire safely.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, just from my experience, I've always felt really safe And part of that is just, the knowledge of the landscape that our practitioners have and the knowledge of how the day is going to go. Ron, at the beginning of the day, he tells you what fire is going to happen and where it's going to happen. And that's exactly how everything happens. So he has a very, planned and methodical way of doing things. I also wanted to add, for the COVID-19 safety, we had, we reduced our guest list, obviously, but we also had masks. We had testing for, for everyone that could access it through the university, which is all of us, all our staff and our students, and also social distancing and being outdoors. But yeah, that was an added safety challenge this year. And so I'll just add that.
I think too, we often have people participating who know about fire from different perspectives. So both from a perspective of cultural burning, as well as from perspectives of prescribed fire and from fire suppression. So we have multiple knowledge holders that are kind of guiding and supporting the work of the workshop participants.
Thank you. So I think we had a quick kind of definition question. So can you explain the difference between a controlled versus a prescribed burn?
Oh, I thought you were going to say between cultural burning and prescribed burning, because that's typically the question that we get.
We can add that too.
Because I don't think I could answer the difference between a controlled burn and a prescribed burn. That sounds a little more technical to fire science and policy, because for my mind, a controlled burn would be a prescribed burn. But Deniss, were you about to add something there? And then I'll say something about prescribed and cultural.
I think people use those terms interchangeably. Yeah, that's what I was going to add.
Okay, so Melinda mentioned one of the distinctions that we really really appreciate from Chairman Goode around the difference between prescribed burning and cultural burning. He will often say prescribed burning, you might come in, burn and leave, maybe not return ever, or 10, 20 years in the future. Whereas cultural burning is that commitment, that kind of relationship to the place, continued application of fire at intervals, as well as preparing the land and then following up, taking care of the land after the burn. So it's an ongoing commitment and practice, whereas prescribed fire is kind of, it seems devoid of that relationship to place. There's the implementation of fire as a landscape stewardship tool broadly, but not thinking about more the relationship and the responsibility between people and that place, if that makes sense. And Deniss and Melinda, feel free to jump in.
I was just going to add, and this is something that I learned the last trip that we made, which was a couple of months ago, even the goals of a cultural burn versus a prescribed burn, cultural burns is very much grounded in those basketry materials or culturally significant plants used for food, fiber, medicine, watercraft. Those tend to be the goals of why fire is put to the ground in the first place, that regeneration of culturally significant plants, but also how my people and California peoples hold baskets in such high regard, and that they carry our life, they carry our medicines, our foods, our children. I'm by a train station, I apologize. So having that goal as part of the cultural burns versus a prescribed burn, I'm told that the goal is acreage. Acreage is burns over brush that's cut down to slow the fuel load for ignition. So those tend to be the fundamental differences in why we set fire in the first place. And then Deniss.
Yeah, I think y'all got most of it. I think just to summarize, that relational aspect is really important. And like Melinda was saying, it's important to continue that relationship throughout for years sometimes. And I think it's important to note that, people come back to these places, they have stories of these places, they have food and baskets. All of that is, different than maybe a prescribed fire, which has different goals because it's from an agency, et cetera. And so that's the difference.
So I'm going to sum up two questions together, which I think are a great closing before. Remember that we're going to have that discussion starting in about 6 minutes. I shared the link again. But before we start that, I want to combine two questions, one of which was really, do you think that these sort of cultural burning practices can be of large enough scale to make an impact on the California wildfire problem? And leading on from there, what's your vision for cultural burning and fire in California over the next 50 years? So I'll leave you with those broad questions to answer as we close up today.
I think those are great questions. I think that one of the things that I like seeing in that fire management plan referenced is the idea of allocating funding to support cultural burning. You know, that right now I don't see funding flowing to support cultural burning. There's funding for prescribed fire. And I think the question as to how broadly it can be applied really is dependent on what tribes would like to do, and then the resources available to support tribal-led initiatives.
Yeah, I would agree that that's more a question of capacity of, you know, having the resources, the tools to be able to do burns like that, and then also the ability to make decisions as sovereign nations. So I think that that's also another hurdle sometimes, is just being able to be lead on those projects instead of just another voice in the room. So I think it's a question of those two things.
And I'll just add a couple of things from the conversations that I've had with multiple scientists and people and practitioners. Is the goal is hopefully there's enough resources that are allocated to cultural burn practitioners in all different parts of California, northern and southern, where the south might be a little bit more prevalent to large scale catastrophic wildfire. So having these smaller scale burns be rolled out with cultural practitioners will hopefully help slow the effects of not only the wildfire season, but also removing that fuel load that causes these catastrophic wildfires, or leads to these catastrophic wildfires in the first place. And of course, the overall goal of hoping to slow emissions with enough timing and the seasonal burns that practitioners demonstrate. That tends to be the long-term goal in mitigating these large-scale wildfires and also mitigating the effects of climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we even saw some examples of that last year with areas where Amamutsun land stewards had burned that fared better in the wildfires that occurred within their homelands.
Thank you so much. And I think in this time we have maybe room for just a quick, 2-minute question. Do you do any workshops or outreach with sort of, it says school students, but I'm assuming, K through 12 students about cultural burning?
That's a good question. That is not an area we have expanded into specifically. I mean, sometimes we have kids come. I mean, often there are kids at the workshops who are either related to us or to practitioners and partners. So there is that learning aspect. I know one of our participants in the class this year, who's actually a student who came through Open University, who's not a UC Davis student, but who was able to enroll in the class, is working on collaboration with a practitioner to develop some learning opportunities for students in our school district. So that's pretty neat. That's an independent project that kind of grew out of the relationships built over the course of the class and workshops. But that's not something we have been able to develop specifically yet. It could well be, though, that that some of our partners are doing that. For example, I know Chairman Goode and Diana Almendariz regularly speak to youth and children of all ages to teach them about cultural burning and land stewardship.
Great. So I really thank you for the wonderful presentation and this really, really interesting discussion. We're going to follow up this discussion now. There's a separate Zoom room, so please follow that link. The link will disappear when we close the room in about 1 minute. And in this last minute here, I know we can't hear, but please give a virtual sort of round of applause and thank you for coming here and sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much.